Once your work is finished, don't watch the television. Once your work is finished, find something constructive to add to your mind. Have an hour for reading. And I don't mean read comic books. Read something that will make you know what's happening. So when you get in a conversation, you can sound intelligent even if you aren't. Do you hear me what I'm saying?
Yo, here we go again. Pardon the sweat, I just came from a run. Getting ready for that 10K in April. But I had a book I started to read, man. I've been highlighting many of the pages. And this is another one that I'm going to go chapter to chapter. See, I highlighted. This is one of the books. I'm not only reading this book, I'm studying this book. I think I did a review of it one time before, but I got to talking to somebody on Twitter. Well, it was about Thurgood Marshall. And I put a comment about him being part of the Bouye, the black bourgeoisie, etc., etc. And, you know, they started saying I was anti-intellectual and, you know, everybody has their opinion or whatever. But I was trying to explain to them, and I cited this book, but, you know, people don't read nowadays. So I guess Jay-Z has to say it or something. But talking about how the freemen and freedmen with a D, F-R-E-E-E-D, had different goals in 1865 after emancipation. And this book explains it beautifully. And I also explain about Creoles, because I'm born and raised in New Orleans, and I always ask, like, what does that mean? But nobody can tell me. They'll just say, oh, Creole just mean Creole, like it's Creole. Nobody can understand. But I found out why. Because many of those people, listen, son, anybody that want to know, read the book if you think I'm lying. They had different goals. You had people who were free. This book talks about the two cities, Charleston, South Carolina, which I visited once, but I was only there a few days, and New Orleans, Louisiana, the place I know like the back of this hand. And I always wondered, like, who are these people? The Creoles, I know that they were mixed. Some people call them light skin, but many of them, you know, they had white fathers and, you know, African mothers, slave mothers, mulatto mothers, whatever. And one thing I do disagree about this book, like, they talk about the unions as if, come on now, this stuff wasn't consensual. You know, it's like being with a child, or if I'm a prison guard and, oh, they fell in love. No, there couldn't be no love because the power dynamic would never allow for consensual. So I think he needs to stop with this consensual stuff. And, you know, and the women did. They probably saw an opportunity, you know, for a better life for them children or whatever. But they don't try to make this stuff romantic, please. But anyway, the first chapter of this book is called Misfits Metropolises, and it is wonderful. It talks about how you had this whole group of people, these mulattoes, my grandmother used to call them, but they had white fathers and black mothers. Now, in New Orleans and Charleston it was different than Jim Crow, what we're used to now, this black or white binary. And that didn't start until Jim Crow. Because you always had, in most Caribbean societies, most European societies that came over here, you always had that third buffer. You had the slaves, which were, you know, mainly black people. You had the, you know, master class or whatever, or I like to call them human traffickers. You had the enslaved, not slave, because I don't use that word slave. The enslaved, because most of these people were more than that. They were carpenters too, who were enslaved, and, you know, their work was actually taken from them. But then you had this middle class, And the only way slavery would work is you had this middle class. In America, it was by immigrants, whites who came from Italy, what's the country? Greece, Italians. They had that buffer in British America during the 18th century. But in New Orleans, which was ruled by the French, and in Charleston, what was basically, and he explains that most of the founders and people from Charleston were from Barbados, and they came. So they brought those same attitudes. So you had this class of what I call mulattoes or Creoles of color, what they call. And these people when emancipation came, they, especially emancipation and then Plessy versus Ferguson, put them in a position that was lower than what they had during slavery. So this is why, and now the freedmen, they wanted land, 40 acres and a mule and all that. The free men, without a D, they already had this stuff. So they just wanted to be able to go into a restaurant and sit with white people. They wanted to sit in front of the bus, the streetcar. Because I never understood. I said, okay, why are we fighting for that? Why are we marching in the streets and watching the streets so we can live in the neighborhood with whites and we don't even have the money to live there? We can, it's the same dichotomy with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Because Martin Luther King was from this, he was a mulatto, but he was from this bourgeoisie. The man, he had a PhD in the 60s. I mean, how many black guys now that are doctors in theology? His father was a preacher. He was from that bourgeoisie. And then when Malcolm came and the Panthers came, they came from a more secular, more I wouldn't say downtrodden, but I would say landless, people. And that's I think that's what we're going through today. I mean, the Democrat Party has totally went the Bouye route. But anyway, the book. This is not politics. This is not politics. It says, in the American colonies as a whole, poor, slaveless European immigrants and their descendants were the largest single social group. Political stability hinged on these impoverished Americans not overturning a system that left them poor. They will be won over to identification with the master class through race. And that's how it happened in the United States. You see? And so you had that buffer in the United States and the British colonies, but New Orleans and Charleston was so different. Even more than in Charleston, the mixed race free population of New Orleans constituted a distinct community. In colonial times, the New World born descendants of the original colonists had dubbed themselves Creole. Their mixed race descendants born in the New World but were roots in both Europe and Africa were dubbed Creoles of color. By 1788, these free people of color constituted more than a third of New Orleans' population. And most of them owned slaves. And in the next chapter, I'll show where most of them fought for the Confederacy because they wanted that system in place. It wasn't until after all that, and they saw they didn't have any friends, so they said, okay, well, we're going to identify with the black masses. And it talks about Haiti, how after the slave revolt in Haiti, you had many mixed race slave owners who came to New Orleans and they blew the population up. They came and added to that. They said it was 1/3 of the population were free people of color. And they still here. And in the slave revolts that rattled New Orleans in 1811 and Charleston in 1822, free people of color largely sided with the slaveholders, and some actively helped put down the insurrections. It was not until the eve of the Civil War that Charleston became majority white. And this was only on account of international immigration from Europe. This is all in the book. I try to tell them. With their valuable skills and their wealthy fathers, select Creole of colors amassed real estate empires in the city. Many owned slaves as well. The 1830 census recorded hundreds of slave owners of color in Greater New Orleans. More non-white slave owners that were found in the states of Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida combined. Oh man. And so it shows you that in these two cities and in other places too, you had that this was the Caribbean system. This was the New World system before, the Louisiana Purchase, when the British, they came. And their religion, their ideology was more segregated than the French or the Spanish. They believed in they came up with the one drop rule, where even if you had one drop of black blood, you were considered African American. What we have right now. But yes, this is an awesome book. I'm gonna go chapter to chapter and read some more verses. Some more passages in it. But read this book. This book tells you everything you need to know. I think it's awesome. I love to meet the author, so I could learn more about his research. But Daniel Brooke, The Accident of Color, and it goes into a lot about how in New Orleans they couldn't even enforce segregation here because you got so many people that they look white. Their skin is lighter than people who are considered white. So it was just a mess. But it goes to show you that, when I was younger, and I've never said this publicly, when I was younger, I would always say, those light-skinned people, 1 second they're black, and then the next second they're white. It just depends on whatever, whatever suits them, whatever can be beneficial at the time. And I was right, but they've been doing it for years. I'm not saying that that is wrong, but I believe in showing who you truly are, and not trying to be friends and at 1 second and betray the next minute. So we're going to delve into more of the history of these people, and we're going to delve more into Reconstruction, one of the time periods that should be studied more and more. It's not studied enough, I don't think. There's a lot of books that's written on Reconstruction, but I think it should be its own class in school. I think just that period from 1865 to about 1877, those 12 years where blacks were basically had, enjoyed the promised land or whatever, but you had the freemen who took it upon them to say, well, we're going to lead the whole 10%, talented 10 theory. We're going to lead the whatever masses. And then you had other people who were saying, no, the masses need to rise up and do things on their own. We don't always have to be led around, which what I agree with more. Booker T. Washington, I agreed with him where he talked about learning skills and all, but I don't think you should throw away the liberal arts. I think you can do both. Even in your personal life, you don't have to be an expert on it, but you can do both. And I guess it's that same fight that we've been having for almost 200 years, 300 years. They're having it on Twitter. So let the fight continue. Peace.